Welcome back to Studio Wesley Annex, the audiovisual podcast where we break down the lectionary text of the week. I'm your host, Sam Sauls-Williams, and Mike, I'm going to start with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I just noticed we have this very red and blue energy right now. That is very cartoon-like, as you mentioned prior.
I was talking about before we started recording that I'm turning into Mike I just got new glasses that look like him, and my haircut right now is a little Mike.
And I said to Sam, I'm so sorry. That's horrible for you.
This is my final evolution.
Are we Pokemon?
Sid, yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay.
I go from blue to red. Sid, how are you doing?
I'm good. I think it's funny you said red and blue energy, Mike, because just recently, anytime I watch TV, I was introduced to this idea of red energy, blue energy characters, how that's kind of character model, the fiery person and then the calm, and that's a trope in a lot of romance stories and whatever. And I can't unsee it because it's so literal. You'll always see one character in blue, one character in red, or one. I was just watching Past Lives, and there's a scene where one of them has a red backpack, one of them has a blue. I'm like, what is So now I see that everywhere. I see it everywhere.
That's crazy. Does that make me the villain, the bad guy?
No, you're just
it's not
fiery
bad. It's just red or assertive, and then there's the one that's more or whatever. Yeah.
I don't want to do anything wrong. I think of Ruby and Sapphire from Steven Universe. That's the best example of it. Because in that one, it's not Sapphire's less dominant. She's just calmer, and she just makes the world better. I love that show. Josh, how are you doing?
Doing good. I immediately thought of Fireboy and Water Girl when I hopped on.
The
theme. Also went to a hockey game last night, and the team's colors were red and blue, so that was a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you, Sam.
You said Fireboy and Water Girl, and my brain was Shark Boy, Lava Girl. I don't know. My brain could not comprehend.
I think Sam knew what I was talking about, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to say it because I already made you guys feel old before the recording started. But do you guys know Fireboy and Water Girl? It is a Flash website game.
Cool math game.
Coolmathgames.com, man. Anyway,
I also thought of Lava Girl and Shark Boy, so I think this is a generational thing we have here.
It's such a lame game, but you play it during class.
I literally had to pause myself from calling Josh out for getting Shark Boy and Lava Girl wrong. And then I was like, no, I just don't understand what's happening.
I did also grow up on that movie. A fantastic movie. Piece of cinema. Dream. With that, Sid, do you want to center us in a little bit of a prayer today? I think we need it.
Yeah, let's pray. God, thank you so much for today. Yes, I just want to express my gratitude, especially in the times where things feel really chaotic, socially, politically, otherwise. I'm sure everyone has chaos in their lives. And these moments where we get to come together and laugh and be silly are just gems. And so thank you for that. Thank you for the joy we get to experience, even amongst all the chaos. I pray that today we would just be open to one another's thoughts and feelings and insights into the text, and that we would grow to know more about you and your love in this time. In your precious name, Jesus, amen.
Amen. That was such a beautiful prayer. But all I'm thinking about is, right after that song, when the cookie mom and dad spit at the camera, because that scene scared me as a child, and now it's stuck in my head. So please, Mike, will you take us away with the New Testament text and get this image out of my head?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm doing 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 11, or as Allison would say, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 11. She watches all of these, so that's why I had to say that. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a word vomit thing here, just to preface that. So the first thing that sticks out to me is this is just another passage, as millions of passages in the Bible, that just have me engaging with this never-ending discussion in my brain of self-deprecating and the place that serves in a biblical context. And basically what I mean by that is we see two sort of voices that emerge in like so many texts, which is like one that says, I am not worthy. I'm not worthy of God's love. I'm not worthy of this. I'm not worthy of this. And that's used to like illustrate, but God still loves you because God cares about everyone, right? And then there's the other side that's like, no, you are worthy of God's love, right? Like every single person is worthy and deserving of God's love. And those two things, they don't contradict each other. Like those two totally work hand in hand. But I think I always engage with this idea of like one over the other, because I think, we get sort of debates in the religious sphere about like this I am not worthy #fear God sort of like motion, which to some of us can feel a little like problematic and troubling to hear. And then other times we lean into this, like, you are worthy of God's love. And that feels much nicer to me. So just like the constant marketing job in my brain that's like, why don't we do this one more than the other? Or like, what is the balance here? So this text specifically kind of leans into that, like, you are not worthy, which is nice. I just wanted to pose that's always where my brain is like engaging with and thinking about. So that's one thing on my mind. The second is this text is just very sort of like, define the terms discussion. It's very blue character energy is where we're going with this right now. Like to me, I'm reading this as like, hey guys, that's cool. Like just to make sure we're on the same page, like it all starts with the resurrection, right? Like resurrection. And that's why all these things fall into place. The resurrection is the thing that happened. They said it was going to happen and it did. So that's kind of like the groundwork for everything. So if we don't believe in that, like we have to start there. Right. And I do very much respect a person who's willing to like, define the terms, right? Like, let's start and make sure we're all on the same page here. And that's what this text is for me, is like, all right, just to be clear, resurrection. Yeah. Good. Everybody good on that. That's where it started. And we like talked about that. It happened. It's a whole thing. He like did all these things. The self-deprecating aspect is like at the end, he's like, Jesus like showed himself to these people after he resurrected, and these people. And then finally he came to me, and like, I'm the worst of all of us. So like, if he came to me, that's pretty cool. So anyways, just that's like the word vomit of where my brain is thinking of just like, what is a more effective way when we're talking about like this section ends with, whether then it is I or they, this is what we preach and this is what you believe. So it's kind of a call to action of like, okay, now that we've defined our terms, let's go off and do the thing. So just me thinking of like, which one's more valuable when like talking to other people about religious things? Like, is it this like, hey, none of us are worthy and God loves us anyways, that's awesome? Or is it like, hey, we are all worthy of God's love and that's incredible? Because the second one feels more marketable to me. Okay, that's where I'll leave it.
Michael, I like how you included like the conversation. I think it's a very like mental, emotional, like spiritual thing to read the Bible and to just suffer, not suffer. Suffer's not the right word, but like wrestle with this idea of like trying to be humble, but also not too humble, understanding like God's love, but also taking action in your own life and having like the confidence, this humility versus like confidence battle that goes on, and trying to like have a relationship with God where you can understand your place in that. Understand like the power that's been given to you, but also you don't want to like seem too powerful and like step over others while you're trying to do God's work. But I like how you talked about after they kind of go through this journey, they then decide, okay, now that we're all in the same place, let's go do something about it. Let's go like spread the gospel. Let's go like share what we found in this relationship with God. So I found that very interesting, and I appreciate your like perspective on that.
Yes, I don't have like a whole lot to add, because I feel like I myself am kind of like sifting through this text and kind of figuring out what's resonating with me. But I agree that it's kind of like reading the Bible can be interesting, because it can be like, sometimes it feels like you're being pulled by these two extremes, like often. Like one script, which I mean, like, this is the whole thing of like, people will be like, the Bible contradicts itself all the time. But then a lot of Christians are like, no, it doesn't necessarily contradict itself. It's just these pieces of the puzzle or whatever. And I think that's, again, kind of like both things are true, where it's like, I think of scriptures where it's like faith, faith without works is dead, right? Faith, but then scriptures that are like, you're saved by faith alone, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of like, these kinds of discussions around like our agency versus like, you know, like in social science, agency versus structure, like how much of this is us, how much of this is not us. And yeah, this conversation of just like starting with the resurrection, like just so we're clear, like you don't have any power without this act that Jesus committed and sacrificed for us.
I agree with what all of you are saying. And I think I'm going to talk about this in my text as well. That kind of like, it's not me, I'm not worthy of this. Like that kind of energy that I think is in just like a lot of the Bible, like we're talking about. And I see it as sometimes more harm than good, because I think there's a difference between like lifting up the power of the Trinity and putting yourself down. And I don't think those necessarily always have to go hand in hand. Like you can talk about how worthy the Trinity is without being like, and I suck because of that. Like there's no way I'm worthy to be here. But the other thing it made me think about is like in communication study, and especially in like conflict and disagreement, one of the things that most research talk about is like you have to start with a common ground. And I think this is a really foundational text for that, because in order to have all these different conversations that we're having and all the debates that are in the Bible, and in order to sit in the contradiction, you have to sit with someone and say, let's lay out our terms, let's lay on what we agree upon. And I think with this like central text that is used in the beginning of Christianity, now when there are so many different sects and groups and you're having these different conversations and disagreements, I still think it's important to do that. I think it's important to do that in most conversations, to say that like, here is what we agree upon, here is where we have common ground. But also that means like, what are we disagreeing about, to like set out the conversation. So I think there should be more texts that are just like, let's lay some ground rules. Here's what you actually believe if you believe this. And if you don't, let's talk about that too. With that, we're going to transition into Isaiah. Josh, you ready to take away?
Yes, I am ready to take it away. So I had Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1-8. And reading it also, like I found a lot of echoes of a lot of like Michael's text, just like going over it and what he was saying. Because for this, really just the first, it's the name of the chapter is called Isaiah's Commission. So a lot of it is with Isaiah like being called out. He talks about, you know, these are things that I've seen. This is like the duty that I feel the Lord has given unto me. And so this is what I'm going to do. And he goes into a lot of detail. And he talks about, I think it's called seraphim. I think I'm saying that word right. Seraphim. And so that was a word that I've heard a couple times, but I was like, you know what? I think it means angel, but I'm not really sure. So I went and did some more research, and I found out that it translates to burning one. And so it represents like how on fire, obviously angels are like messengers, but it talks about like how on fire they are for the Lord, and just how their soul is quite literally burning up for Lord, and for how much they want to do for him. And so some of the stuff he talks about seems like very like revelation-y to me. It's like really you saw this crazy stuff. These angels that came down, there's some crazy voices with their doorposts, and they filled the temple with smoke. So that was some very interesting things to me, but I found some commentary that really like broke it down, and a lot of it was like very metaphorical. Big thing to me is like it talks about the 6 different wings, and it talks about 2 of them were supposed to cover their faces because they can't look directly at God. 2 of them are supposed to cover their feet because it's supposed to signify like how important the land and that they're in God's presence. And then the last 2 I thought was interesting because it's for flight, so it's like you need to go do something. So I was kind of just towards the end of the verse, he talks about how he has been called to do something. In verse 8, there's kind of that very popular, you know, who shall I send, Lord? Who shall I go? Or the Lord asks, who shall I send? And the person says, here I am, Lord, send me. So I kind of like it just because Isaiah was also a very like young person. I think he was like around our age, maybe, or maybe even a little bit younger. So I definitely identify with this. I admire like his ability to stand up for himself and be like, yes, Lord, send me. I'm ready. I've seen all these things, and I will, you know, be a great prophet. But in the beginning, he definitely does like kind of struggle with what you kind of talked about, Michael, earlier, with his battle with like humility versus pride. It says, "Woe to me, for I am ruined. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." He talks about kind of his sinful. He has to like confront his sinful nature, but then in the end, he kind of comes full circle and does like, "No, I still do feel called by God. Like I'm not a perfect man, but I still am here to serve, and that is something that I do feel called to do." So this really was only like 8 verses, but it definitely does cover a lot. I just found that very interesting. The short journey that it does, especially since this is like in the very beginning. It's like only chapter 6. I think Isaiah is a lot longer than that, but it talks about his commission. So I like how Isaiah breaks it down for us.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the scriptures this week are like, ugh, I don't know. This is a lot. This is one of those where I was like, wow, there's like wings and over the which is okay, this is a total sidebar, but I got my friend Gray, it's funny because my friend Gray is not a Christian at all. For Christmas they got me a tree topper that's like a biblically accurate angel, so it's like a bunch of like eyeballs and like wings and stuff, and I was like, that's so cute. But yeah, like kind of like apocalyptic, like crazy stories like this. I'm always like, I feel like there's so much interesting stuff to break down in them, but I feel like I don't feel like I have the like knowledge to do that, which always makes me want to like do more research, do more reading to understand the symbolism. But I do think that what I think a common thread I see with this text and the other text is this idea of like moving from guilt to like being emboldened, that like movement that the resurrection gives us of like radically accepting ourselves. Like it's because of this act of Jesus that we are able to practice radical self-acceptance and move into a place of like being emboldened, like hearing our call, acting and not being held back by our past, by the things that we've done that we feel guilty for, by the things we'd like to change about ourselves. And that's kind of what this reminds me of, this moment where he goes from like, I'm unclean to like, actually like, here, like send me, and that's like a movement that I feel like we all can be on.
I'm definitely supposed to be talking right now, and I am currently on the Wikipedia page for the King of the Beginning, because I'm not crazy right now, because what I'm realizing, so I also I'm kind of in your place of like, I don't know what to do with these kind of texts, especially like Mike's was just about how we're not worthy, and this one's about we're not worthy, and my text, I've already read it, it's about us not being worthy, and so I like don't want to keep hammering on that, because that's just hard to keep talking about. And so while Josh was talking, I was like, who's this king? Because it starts with in the year that he died, in the year that King Uzziah, I think that's how you say it. I'm probably butchering it, but in the year that King Uzziah died. And the reason I started doing research is because I was like, there's a lot of context in those 3 words. Like I'm pulling up the full first sentence is, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne. And like that led me down this rabbit hole of looking up what happened with the king. Apparently he had leprosy and he died. And he reigned for 52 years before contracting leprosy and passing the throne to his son. But it doesn't talk about his son. It just talks about in the year that he died. And I think, honestly, that research has made me like connect a little bit more with this text, because I think there's an interesting narrative around when the world, specifically politically and historically, feels like it's crumbling apart, being called. And that element of this, of like Isaiah, it is already hard to be called by God. And you already have that imposter syndrome of like, I'm not worthy. But specifically, this is a moment of political turmoil. This is a 52 long year regime changing. And if you like think about it in that context, this is probably a really scary time to be alive and to have this moment of revelation. And so I think that is an important element of it, especially with what everybody is feeling right now in this time of massive uncertainty. Of it is always hard to be called, but how much harder is it to be called in a time where it's needed? in a time where it feels like you don't see God necessarily. And I think it's really interesting that God shows up in this time, that in the year where a 52-year long regime ended, God shows up. In the year where everything around Isaiah is changing, he shows up and calls Isaiah. That was a word vomit response, but I think something in there was accurate, because I think that's something we can all feel right now.
No, I think that's something helpful for me to latch onto, this idea that like God's showing up after it, like in the time that it's needed most. I think that's very comforting. I can't get past the creatures when I read something like this. Like literally my brain is just like, what are I have to look at pictures. I have to look at a lot of pictures. I just need to see these creatures. So I have nothing else to add other than like look up these creatures, because they're terrifying looking in most of these. Or catch one on top of Sydney's Christmas tree.
It also brings back, this was I don't even remember which episode this was. It might have been the Christmas episode, but the idea, don't tell me do not be afraid if this is how you're going to describe your angels. You don't get to play both sides. You don't get to talk about it covering its eyes with its 6 wings and then be like, but it's okay, it's chill.
This terrifying creature says, all your faults and wrongdoings are forgiven. And I'm like, then why are you here?
This creature comes up with a coal to your face and puts it to your lips. Like, yeah, no shit, I'm going to be scared.
Like, is that a threat? Like, what?
Yeah.
Well, I'm forgiven. Okay.
Yeah, it said you're purified. Let my coal touch your lips. With that, I hope, honestly...
Wait.
Oh, please.
Is this flaming creature also like shy blue energy because they're covering their face and their feet? Little insecure. Like
They have to be. They
actually have 8 wings, because 2 cover the eyes, 2 cover the feet, 2 fly, and 2 are going like this the whole time. If you're audio listeners, you're probably really confused. So check out the VOD on YouTube. With that, we're just going to go straight to break. Please take this time, look up what a Zephyrim looks like, because I did it, and I'm not disappointed. And we'll see you guys back here soon. And we're back. We're going to go straight into Psalm 138. Sid, you ready to talk about the Psalms?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it.
Do you like talking about the Psalms? Because everybody else, I feel like, has given an opinion on Psalms.
Oh, I think I feel the same. I think I feel equally about all of the Bible in general. Yeah, I'd say I don't. Okay, this is going to sound bad because, like, I know this is my job and I'm here. But, like, I don't love talking about the Bible in general, because I feel like I have the same takes over and over again, which is like,
that's fair.
Systemic oppression, racism. Like, I just kind of like harp on the same things, I feel like. But look, as long as y'all aren't tired of hearing me talk about it, I can keep doing it. No, but I don't mind that. I don't mind them. They're very moody, and I'm pretty moody, so. Sorry, I was trying to change the translation I had on here on my phone. But now I'm like lost, so I'm just gonna stay with the translate. I'm gonna take that as a sign. So yeah, the psalm is Psalm 138. And I think a lot of it is very like typical of the Psalms. There's like a lot of giving thanks and praise, and then a lot of like, on the day I cried, you answered me. And so it's like an overall pretty positive psalm, I'd say. There's a lot of, you send your power against my enemies, But I think the part that really stuck out to me the most is literally at the very beginning. I give thanks to you with all my heart, Lord. I sing your praise before all gods. And in the other translation that I was trying to pull up, it had gods in quotations. And I think this stuck out to me because I was thinking about, like, obviously I think it's talking about gods like other, what's the word I'm looking for? What do they call, like, false gods or whatever? other deities that people are worshiping that aren't the true God.
Idols?
What?
Are you looking for idols?
Idols. Thank you. I'm like, there's a word for this. Like false idols and stuff like that. And like praising God like in front of all of them. And I was thinking about that idea and like something I think it felt really like encouraging to me because I was just the other night talking to my partner about how like it's funny because you know you do all this work of like healing and all this like you know inner work of like healing your traumas and all this work of like learning how to be in healthy relationships and learning how to rest and learning how to like on this like healing self-love journey of like loving your community. But what I feel like we don't talk about enough is that you will have to be countercultural. Like there's a point where like you have to act in a way that is in opposition to what culture is telling you to do, right? Society is going to be like, you need to work. You need to do this. You need to cut off people who treat you wrong. You know what I mean? Like you need to be like, it's you against, like our society is going to keep giving you those same messages. Be like, you're only worthy if you're XYZ. You're only worthy if you look like this and if you act like this and you have this job. But like you have to choose to like not internalize those messages. And to me, that kind of feels like I feel a connection here of like in a society or like what are the idols of our society? I mean, the number one thing I think about is like money. I feel like our society really is a money hungry society and people worship it. And I mean, there's obviously the components of like we need money to live. So there's also that like fear. Like, what does it look like to like in the face of the idols of our society to like keep choosing love, keep choosing God, keep choosing, you know, the values and characteristics that we're taught are like Jesus, you know? And it there will be moments where it's like you have to be countercultural and it's not easy. And not countercultural in a way that it's like, you know, like we're like oppressed or something as Christians, but like in the way that it's like it doesn't always feel easy, I guess is what I'm saying, to like heal. So that's what I'm thinking about. I don't know. I kind of word vomited, so tell me what y'all think.
I was going to say something completely different, and then you said what you said at the end, and now like that. The thing is, so when our society is so obsessed with like us and like that grind set mindset that you talked about and that kind of like cutting people out, that also means that loving others instead of loving yourself is also countercultural. And that I think is the part. It was 2 weeks ago's text. I don't remember, but it was talking about, it was when Jesus reads the Isaiah scripture about like really loving people and like working towards helping the poor and working with people in prison, that kind of thing. That is countercultural, even though it's supposed to be the thing that we're all following. And so I understand the fear of like, I will stand by what you said, like Christians are not an oppressed group. However, I do think like when the majority of Christianity and modern Christianity especially isn't doing the things that it stands by as an institution, then you doing that is countercultural. Like you making the choice to love your neighbor and give one of your coats to another, like those kind of, that is countercultural.
Like even within the culture of like American Christianity.
Exactly. In the people that are supposed to be believing in it, sometimes actually believing in it and acting upon that is countercultural. Because I think there are, I would even say within American Christianity, there are false idols that we lift up. Because I think there are leaders who make that part of their identity, but that does not make them a deity. Damn, bars, first of all. Somebody clip that. The only other thing, I have no other transition. The only other thing I was going to point out is with all of our conversations in literally every text today about like if we're worthy or not, verse 6, though the Lord is exalted, he looks kindly on the lowly, though lofty, he sees them from afar. And I think that's the closest I've heard today to like what I'm trying to get at of like though lofty, he sees us from afar. Like, we are able to lift up how amazing the Trinity is without saying, and we as humans are so bad and not worthy of love. And I think that's the closest that gets to it.
So this is very interesting. Sorry, I'm going to respond to this in such a oddly specific way, but I'm like working on a production of Godspell right now. And like that musical is specifically written kind of like in these arguments, Sydney, that you're saying, or these like notions that you're talking about, like that focus on Jesus and like the spreading of these parables and these stories, they're all centered around this exact thing, right? Like, what's the parable we were working on the other day was like the sower and the seed. And he's like, and that which fell among the weeds, they hear the word of God, but further growth is impaired by cares, wealth, and pleasures of the world, right? Like so much of this is like construed, and we have to get in the right headspace in order to be able to like actually do the work of like, oh, what is it actually that we're being called to do? And it's so easy to like not do that. And this whole show is like the framework of Jesus that I think really speaks to this. So anyways, that's just the reflection I'm thinking of, is just like sometimes it feels like the call is so easy that it gets really frustrating when it's like, how are we interpreting this differently right now? Like this seems very abundantly clear to me. So I think that frustration is very real. So I don't know.
Yeah, Michael, I definitely do agree like with your frustration. I think it's crazy when people can read the same thing and have totally different like they can, not that like they can see different things, but they like actually like physically disagree on like the words seem pretty clear to me. Kind of does blow my mind. Anyway, people are interesting, guys. But I like your perspective, Sydney, because when I read this, I didn't really see like the whole idolization thing. I would have probably taken this in a totally different direction. But I like how you talked about just the very beginning where it talks about the gods. I'm reading the NIV, and mine is like a lowercase g. So that just like stuck out to me even more, because most of the time we see God or Lord, it's capitalized. So when they like bring that up, that just kind of like popped out more to me. And so this whole thing definitely did seem kind of countercultural. I like that all the points you brought up about as Christians, there is a certain point in time where you do have to like stand up. Sam talked about this too. Even though Christianity is like somewhat popular, I would say, here in America, when Christianity isn't doing the things that are right, then we do have to be countercultural and stick up and be like, no, we're going to do this. The verse that really seemed countercultural to me, besides like obviously the very beginning, was like, or just made me think that like, wow, like he's talking about a dream or like a goal for like society that is like so far off, is when you just talked about may all the kings of the earth praise you, and the fact that like everyone is all on the same page. Michael kind of talked about this, like people read the same things and they're like, they just disagree and they're never feel like they're one or unified. So yeah, this whole verse, now that I think about it, does seem very different than the world we live in today. And so I think that's why it is important for us to like step out and not just go with the flow sometimes, as hard as that might be.
We're going to keep going to the gospel text. We're going to be doing Luke 5:1-11. And the reason I sound less enthusiastic right now is because it's about imposter syndrome. And I'm like struggling to think of what else to talk about, because that is what this is about. And it feels wrong doing that so many times, because I feel like it reinforces this idea that we're all talking about as a problem. But that's what this text is. This is Jesus calls his first disciple. This is the moment where he sees Simon and asks to go out into the water with him. And Simon has had a whole day of not catching anything. And Jesus teaches and they listen, and he says, throw out your nets. They bring up a lot of fish, so much so that the boat begins to sink. And the part I want to talk about is 8-11, because 8, this is after the miracle happens. And it says, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch they had taken. And so were James and John, the son of Zebedee, Simon's partner. Then Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats on shore, left everything, and followed him. And you know, maybe I am going to talk about something different, but in the same way. Because this text I immediately read as imposter syndrome because of where I'm at right now. in my life. I'm doing a bunch of job applications for the summer, and there's something I want to be a speechwriter. So writing about other people is great, but having to write that I'm worthy of a job is hard. But I think it's interesting that this text specifically, that moment of imposter syndrome, that moment of I'm not worthy, comes before Jesus makes any kind of offer. It's not like Jesus calls Simon and then Simon is like, I'm not worthy. And then like, he hasn't even said, I want you to be a disciple. I want you to come on this journey. He just does a miracle. And I think, like we've been talking about, there is an argument about like Jesus as a like part of the Trinity and as the Son of God is higher than us. And so I get that, but it also just feels wrong to like immediately see a miracle and think I'm not worthy to be here. And so the commentary I read has this beautiful quote that says, Jesus calls Simon and his partners as they are. Simon is acutely aware of his unworthiness, but Jesus is not put off by this in the slightest. Jesus does not ask Simon to get his act together, his resume prepared, and then come back for an interview. Rather, Jesus encounters him as he is, tells him not to be afraid, and calls him to a new mission of catching people. Sin, failure, and human inadequacy are no obstacles to God's call. And I think I do think this is an important conversation to have, because all of us are people who like have grown up hearing these texts, or at least hear them a lot now. And we have these kind of discussions about worthiness and stuff like that. But I also know a lot of people, and know people personally, who didn't grow up around that. And so the idea of going to a church means you have to be worthy of something. And the idea of stepping into a place of faith means I have to get myself ready for that. And I think that is at a disservice to people, that part of American Christianity and part of just modern Christianity is getting your act together and making yourself look perfect to the outside world. Because I think that's not realistic. And I think that's not what God calls us to do. And I think this text shows that Simon couldn't even catch fish this day, and Jesus called him. So I feel like I kind of like sadly went through that text, because I just like, I don't want to keep talking about imposter syndrome, because I know it's something we all feel, but I do think it's important to emphasize that Jesus doesn't care. Jesus sees that you're worthy and doesn't care what you think about how worthy you feel.
I read stuff out of the Voice translation, and the Voice has like footnotes a lot of the time that kind of like give further context to a story. And I'm just going to read the one that's here because I think it's really freaking good. Like, it's really good. The miracles Jesus performs come in all types. He heals the sick. He frees the oppressed. He shows his power over nature. He will even raise the dead. But as the story here shows, one of the greatest miracles of all is forgiveness. To have sins forgiven, to start over again, to have God separate believers from their mistakes and moral failures, to lift the weight of shame and guilt. This may well be the weightiest evidence that God's Son is on the move. The kingdom of God doesn't throw all people in jail. It doesn't execute everyone who has made mistakes or tell them they're just getting what they deserve. Instead, it brings forgiveness, reconciliation, a new start, a second chance. In this way, it mobilizes believers to have a new future. That to me is just really good. I mean, that's like the thing, specifically like lifting the weight of shame and guilt. Like, that has to be part of the messaging when talking to people, is like exactly the opposite. Like, you don't have to have any, like, there isn't anything that you have to be in order to like partake in this. And the messaging that like God's here to lift the shame and guilt that we feel off of us, that's the important part, right? Which I think is cool.
But also that part about them deserving it, and that whole section, to those who say that, and to those who make that argument about others, believing that you are worthy and believing that other people are worthy is countercultural, like we were talking about. Because I think that's a narrative that is too easy to say, and I think it happens a lot. And so, like, believing that is not true, like what you just said, believing that you are worthy and that you're not being punished for something, or that groups of people are not being punished for something that they did, that is countercultural. I just had to say that because I think that is said too often, that people deserve it or that they had it coming kind of thing.
Yeah, Sam, I definitely do agree with the whole, like, you get what you deserve ideology. I think, like, growing up, we're all told, like, your actions have consequences, and that, if you do this, you do this, you do this, then you deserve this, or like this plus this equals that. And I like that, like, Jesus comes into that equation. It's like, but wait, there's another way. It's not just black and white. There's like a whole nother way to do things. And what else I want to say? Oh yeah, back to like the imposter thing. I like, Sam, how you harped on how Jesus like tears down like that whole imposter ideology. For me, when I read this, I definitely do agree, but I feel like Jesus takes it even a step further. And you can just see it like in this story here where Simon's like, oh my God, he has this whole mental breakdown. It's like, step away from me. Like, I'm not worthy to be here. I'm an unclean man. I'm so sin. Like, you're so high, blah, 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 blah. Jesus not only like says, you are worthy to be here, but then he also calls him to be like, you're worthy to be an even higher spot, which is like a whole nother step, which is a whole nother like level of affirming someone, and not just meeting them where they're at, but telling that they're made for even more. And just, I don't know, that really like spoke out to me, that he calls him to not, for Simon, like in that scenario, he was a fisherman. He's like, oh my God, I'm not even worthy to be a fisherman here in your presence. And then Jesus is like, no, you are, but you're not just going to be a fisher for fish. You're going to fish for men, and for people as a disciple for me. And that's like, to me, that just like really spoke to me about how Jesus calls us. It really does affirm people to a whole nother higher calling in their life. I think is very important. So.
Yeah, I don't think I have a whole lot more to add, but I just want to add to kind of what you were saying, Sam, like, that I think that this idea we have that like is kind of a part of the myth of like meritocracy, that like everything we have, we've earned, and then the opposite. If you don't have it or whatever, then like you haven't earned it, or you're like, and that our merit is the way we measure what we have or whatever. And I think a part of that gets really internalized into us, so that it's like, and this is something I'm constantly having to work out, is this idea that like when I do something bad, there has to be some kind of punishment, because it's like, I did the bad thing, therefore this person has to be mad at me. Like, this person surely couldn't just forgive me and extend me graciousness because I like messed up. But yeah, I think that like this also is very relational, because, when we do this to ourselves, when we're constantly like, I'm guilty and bad, I don't deserve it. I'm guilty and bad, I'm undeserving. Guess what? We project that onto others as well. The same things that we are shaming ourselves for, guilting ourselves for, holding ourselves back for. When we look outwards, those are the things that we're going to shame others for, guilt others for, judge others for. So like, it is also inherently relational, that like, and selfless for us to stop making about whether or not we deserve love, and just make it about love. Do we or don't we? I don't know. Like, maybe it just is. Maybe it's out of our control, which I think is the whole point. It was never really in our control. And so we just have to accept that the love is here, and just accept it, and stop like measuring if we think we deserve it or not.
With that, Josh, do you want to take us into our closing prayer for today?
Yes, I would love to do that, Sam. All right. Dear God, thank you for bringing us all here today. Thank you for giving us your son. And thank you for giving us the Bible, Lord, with all these awesome stories and scenarios and examples to help spark these conversations about imposter syndrome, about us feeling worthy enough. And thank you for calling us out of that mindset and into a higher calling. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. I want to thank you guys for being on here with me, and I want to thank everybody at home for listening. And just know, like, the world feels hard, and so sometimes being on a little StreamYard room with a couple people and getting to laugh and talk about text and talk about good messages is important. And so I hope that for those listening, you kind of feel that warmth, especially right now. And just know, as we're talking about, that sometimes it's hard and countercultural to realize how worthy you are. So thank you guys for being here. And that, all God's people said, bye.